Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello there, welcome to the 7th week of our course Elements of Literature and Creative Communication. In fact, we are discussing fiction this week and we would be continuing our discussion of fiction even next week. If you can quickly recall, we began our discussion with defining fiction, and afterwards we went on to discuss various elements of fiction. In fact, in the last class, if you can quickly recall, we began with a discussion on plot, character, theme, style, tone, setting, and how all of them constitute fiction as such. In other words, you can look at these elements as building blocks. What are elements of fiction? Well, of course, as we discussed, you can consider them as some kind of building blocks that together constitute fiction. And when we discussed plot, we discussed how a plot can be looked at, studied and analyzed from Freytag's pyramid point of view. And you've also discussed different types of characters, how in characters you have flat characters, round characters, static characters, dynamic characters, all right. And when it comes to theme, style, tone, how it reveals the idiosyncratic features of the novel, and when it comes to theme, how it discusses the overall vision of the writer, the philosophical tenets that underlie any work of art, and all these things. Well, in this class, we are going to look at fiction and its branches. Now, well, of course, you are very clever, I know this, because the moment you looked at this title, you understood the figure of speech involved here, right? Because we are comparing fiction to a tree, but it is not a direct comparison, it is an indirect comparison, therefore it becomes a metaphor. So, if fiction becomes a metaphor, then various types of fiction become branches of the tree called fiction, right? That is why we call it fiction and its branches. Well, of course, I do not need to explain the concept of types of fiction, because the moment we make use of this metaphor of branches and tree, then you understood what this business of fiction and different types of fiction is all about, because branches per se are not fiction, right, or branches per se are not tree. But what is tree in that sense? Well, it is a sum total of the branches, the roots, the trunk and everything. Similarly, for fiction, elements of fiction constitute fiction, and types of fiction also define fiction. That is the reason why we have used this metaphor, fiction and its branches, all right. Okay, now let us quickly recall, in order to understand this concept of types of fiction, what are the varieties. When we say types, we mean varieties. You can quickly recall different novels that you have read. I am sure you must have read some novels or the other, be it in English or in your own languages, right. So, now quickly recall the different novels that you have read, and and think about variations in them. When I say variations, it is not necessarily or not just in terms of subject and its theme. Obviously, every novel is different from the other novel, because it has a unique subject or unique treatment of the subject and all that. You can also recall it in terms of its style and structure, because each novel has its own distinct style and it has its own unique structure, right. So, branches, when we say types of fiction, these types of fiction have got to do with these distinct styles and structures, all right. So, with this background, let us go ahead and discuss the variations in fiction and the reasons behind that, and within these types of fictions. Well, types of fictions can be broadly called genres of fiction. We have already discussed the concept of genre and form in during our discussion on poetry, or maybe a little before that. So, let us quickly recall those concepts as well here. Okay. Yeah. Broadly speaking, fiction can be classified into three broad genres. It is a very broad genre. Okay. So, first can be called literary fiction. Literary fiction is generally considered as serious fiction. These writers are highbrow writers, and they belong to they discuss the philosophy of life, and they present the truths that they have discovered in the form of fiction in a detailed way. So, that is literary fiction. That is why we have Tolstoy there. And then we have genre fiction, which is also called popular fiction. In fact, many of you have many of you may have read literary fiction, but more than literary fiction, many of you may have read genre fiction or popular fiction. Generally, these the novels belonging to this category are available in airports or in railway stations or in bookstand. So, immediately pick, and by the time your bus comes or when you are waiting for your train to arrive, then you read it and all that, popular fiction. And then you have mainstream fiction. Mainstream fiction, it's not, technically speaking, it's not a very distinct genre, but when genre fiction and literary fiction, when they grow out of their boundaries and reach the collective consciousness of the society, that is when we call it mainstream fiction. In other words, mainstream fiction could be from genre fiction or even from literary fiction. All right. So, this is something we are going to discuss all of them in a little more detailed manner in our subsequent slides. But to begin with, these are the broad categories of fiction. Now, let us quickly recall our discussion or distinction between form and genre. Okay. In the very first week, or probably in the second week, we discussed the difference between form and genre. And we said that in order to understand this concept better, we brought in the metaphor of a building. The architecture of the building can be called form, and the interior design of that building can be called genre, right. So, the architecture, the outer structure of the building can be called form, and the interior design of that particular building can be called genre. However, Webster Dictionary defines genre as a category of artistic, musical or literary composition. Of course, depending on whether it is a musical album, or if it is a movie, or if it is a novel, or if it is literature, you have genres everywhere. Therefore, basically genres deal with categories characterized by a particular style or form or content. That is a very broad definition of genre. It is a category. In other words, genre means a category. In other words, how do we understand genre in a little better way? Well, in order for you to understand genre, you please remember there is story, there is plot, and there is character, and there is a setting, the locale in which, the geographical locale, the time in which it is set, all of them, they together constitute the genre. In other words, in order to understand to which genre the novel that you are reading belongs to, or the fiction that you are reading belongs to, you will have to analyze it in terms of its structure. When I say structure, setting, character, plot and action, story. So, you get genre. Okay. And genre markers, again, they are called genre markers. Some more genre markers are the length of the work you are dealing with, or the type of the character, settings, themes, including viewpoints and narratives. They also determine genre. So, these are some things that we can keep in mind. But let's go ahead with a disclaimer here. These are not again, exclusive categories. Sometimes within these genres you can find overlapping of different genres. Okay. So, there are subgenres, because in each genre there are subgenres, and sometimes writers can do different permutations and combinations, and therefore within a broad genre they can insert a subgenre belonging to another genre and create a new type. But what is the predominant genre is something that we can identify, and within that some variations are definitely possible. They are called subgenres. These are some things that we can keep in mind. Okay. These are not absolute. When we say genres, they are not absolute categories. They just help us in understanding the broad style of the work that you are reading. Why do genres matter? Of course, genres matter because they help readers understand better, because a genre, a work of if fiction belongs to a particular genre, then it has certain features, it has certain elements, it has certain type of stories, it has certain set of characters, and if you already like that particular type of novel, then you can go and buy them. So, it helps us in deciding what we like, and then accordingly we can go and read similar works. So, writers also take advantage of genre, because sometimes they define a market, they define a market, and sometimes a genre also helps the writer in creating a certain template. Let us say, for instance, there is a genre called historical fiction. When we say historical fiction, it already creates a certain template for the writer. So, that means you have to think of a story that belongs to a king, either a fictitious king or an historical king. In fact, generally it is an historical king. It is not history, but you are writing about, let us say for instance, you want to write about Ashoka, the king Ashoka. So, you have to do research on where Ashoka lived, that kind of geographical conditions, the style of his administration, the way he dressed, the way he spoke and all that. So, historical fiction has already provided a rough template for the writer to begin working on. That is why they also help writers in extraordinary ways. Okay. So, now let us go, and in case you are already familiar with different types of fiction, different genres of fiction, you can just identify what is your favorite type. All right. So, let us go ahead without wasting much time. Let us go ahead and discuss different genres. Let genres begin. Okay. Yeah, as I said, there are umpteen genres of fiction. In fact, more than 50 or 60 genres of fiction, and again, even that 50 or 60 is not exhaustive. They are just illustrative, right? They are just illustrative. So, the major genres are mystery, romance, fantasy, thriller, science fiction, and all these things. Within them you can see different permutations and combinations. Like a periodic table, we have compiled various subgenres in each of these main genres. Let us say for instance, in fantasy you have urban fantasy, historical fantasy, you have contemporary fantasy, comic fantasy. Similarly, in science fiction you have dystopian fiction, utopian fiction, military science fiction, cyberpunk, all of them. And in romance you have paranormal romance, you have contemporary romance, you have historical romance. So, all of them, these are called subcategories. We are going to discuss a few prominent categories of fiction in the subsequent slides. Okay. Yeah. Let us begin our discussion of types of fiction with realistic fiction. So, this is one of the predominant types of fiction that we get to read. Okay. How do you identify realistic fiction? A realistic fiction again is set in believable locations. In fact, it is not set in any kind of non-believable settings. In fact, the setting, let us say, it can be in Kolkata, it can be in Delhi, it can be in Bangalore, it can be in Mysore. So, these are the realistic settings. Generally in the contemporary times, maybe in the recent past or contemporary times, that is the setting. And here you and I can easily identify the characters because they resemble us. In fact, in a particular kind of a situation or an event, these characters behave exactly the way you and I behave. In other words, their ability to respond to certain events is much similar to our ability to respond to those events. So, in other words, you and I can find a perfect replica of ourselves in realistic fiction, right. So, there is no scope for us not to disbelieve anything here, because as I said, when you read, most of the times you may wonder, it may be your story or my story, it may be our story, something like that. So, some of the popular works that belong to this category include Dickens's Hard Times, even Oliver Twist for that matter, or Premchand's Godan, or U.R. Ananthamurthy's Samskara, or even Chetan Bhagat's 5 Point Someone. Of course, this particular is Chetan Bhagat's 5 Point Someone. It is it accommodates several genres within it, but at one level you can also call it a realistic fiction, okay. And later I will tell you the other genres it belongs to, then you can identify to which broad genre this particular work belongs to, okay. So, these are the salient features that through which you and I can identify realistic fiction, okay. From realistic fiction, let us go to campus fiction. In fact, campus fiction is again a subgenre in realistic fiction, you can call it. So, campus fiction can also be called sometimes campus novel or college novel or even university novel. It is called by several names. And here the setting is restricted to an academic unit. So, it is something like a college or an academic institute like IITs, IIMs, or any universities, or any any of these academic units, they are the settings, that is what that is a defining feature. And by virtue of that you can identify the characters, right. If it is set in academic campus, then the character should be students, academic staff. When we say academic staff, principal, professors, and hierarchy is there, and the relationship between student factions, student wars, and student habits. And even here romance is also part of it, campus romance, it is called campus romance. So, love that takes place here, love triangles, all of them form the crux of campus fiction, right. Now, you understand, right, the moment you decide the setting, the locale, how your choice of characters is restricted, your choice of story is restricted, and all these things. Okay. So, here you can discuss the student teacher relationship or some kind of illicit affairs that take place here, campus love, all of them, or including learning ambitions of students and what are some of the academic impediments a student faces and how he or she overcomes that. All of them form the crux of campus fiction. Of course, you can see that beautiful image. Really, we wish our campus life were to be as studious as this guy is trying to make it to be, okay. Yeah, some of the well known, it is said that 1952 marks the beginning of campus fiction, especially Mary McCarthy's The Groves of Academy, set in the United States, that is supposed to be the genre inaugurating work, campus fiction. But of course, you have some notable names, J.M. Coetzee, who is a major Nobel laureate, South African Nobel laureate, and especially his work Disgrace, published in 1999. It was also, it also won the Booker Prize, an exemplary campus fiction work, you can call it. But David Lodge, an English professor, teaching at the University of Birmingham, popularized this particular genre of fiction. In fact, he has Campus Trilogy written between 1975 and 89. So, here he explores the multiple facets of campus fiction. He is also a well-known theorist on campus fiction. And again, we come across Chetan Bhagat's 5 Point Someone. In fact, the subtitle of the work is What Not to Do at IIT. In fact, the entire fiction is set in the backdrop of IIT, you know that. Therefore, you can also call it campus fiction, Chetan Bhagat's 5 Point Someone. So, from campus fiction, let us go ahead and see other major types of fiction. So, again, speculative fiction is a very broad genre of fiction, and within speculative fiction you have some minor genres or subgenres. Here, generally speaking, in speculative fiction, the stories are set in parallel universes. They are not set in our universe. There are parallel planets, parallel universes, and sometimes, you know, it's not even a scientific universe or scientific planet that you and I know of. It's a pure fantasy. It's a pure fantasy. So, here the writer beautifully creates a new cosmos. You know, the writer creates a new cosmos, new types of characters, new animals, new people, new type of people, you know, people with 3 eyes, people with 1 eye, people with no ears at all, you know, people with tails, all of them, you know, all these are possible in speculative fiction. That is why they are called speculative fiction. Some of the predominant subgenres of speculative fiction can be science fiction, fantasy fiction, horror fiction, gothic fiction, dystopian literature, apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, all of them come under speculative fiction. Now let us go and take a quick look at other subtypes of speculative fiction. Yeah, historical fiction, as we discussed in the beginning of this class, historical fiction, the setting is in the past, you know, and generally it revolves around an historical personality that you and I are familiar with, but it is not history. Please remember, when you read an historical work, you can't come back and say that the character did exactly as he or she did in the novel that you have read. It is a speculative work, though, you know, so based on the character that existed in history, this novel or this fiction takes creative freedom and presents scenario in various presents various scenario, you know, so that is not history. So, you can't look for historical accuracy here, just the background, the template is historical, and therefore it is not history as such. So, it is a fictionalized version of various historical figures or various historical events. Say for instance, based on Indian independence, there are plenty of historical fiction have come based on the character of Aurangzeb. Many novels have come, especially based on the heroic adventures, the heroic feat of Shivaji. Many novels have come, even in Ashoka many novels have come. So, you can understand, broadly speaking, what these historical novels do, right. Some of the important or well known works that belong to this genre can be Midnight's Children. Again, as I said, this is not the only genre that you can find. Writers have the capacity to do a lot of mix and match and create very many things. Therefore, you can find shades of historical fiction in Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. You can also consider Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children as as a work of magic realism, because there are a lot of elements of magic realism there. It can also be considered as literary fiction. Of course, it is literary fiction. So, all of them are possible, but because of its setting and locale, it can also be read as an historical work. And then you have Shashi Tharoor's The Great Indian Novel. Again, it can be read as a political satire which has a detailed and rich and riveting historical background, contemporary historical background, you know. And here Shashi Tharoor does, you know, he goes a little a step ahead and intertwines elements from the Mahabharata with elements from our freedom struggle and creates the new great Indian novel. In fact, the great Indian novel has echoes of the Mahabharata, it has echoes of our story of independence, Indian struggle for independence and all of them. Similarly, Amitav Ghosh's Hungry Tide too. So, these are some well known works that you can say share the features of historical fiction. Okay. From historical fiction, let us go ahead and take a look at science fiction. Okay. Yeah, science fiction, this too is a part of speculative fiction. In science fiction, what happens, depending on you know, it's based on futuristic science, and advances in technological concepts or technical concepts, you know, and advances in physics. You develop a story and present it to the audience. Therefore, you know, though there is a you know, so maybe it may not be possible right now, but looking at the way our science is progressing, our technology is developing, maybe this may be possible one day. That is a kind of a distant resemblance to reality it has. Okay. So, here the plot or the setting is sometime in a different planet, it can be in a different universe, or here in this universe, you know, the physical laws that govern our universe may be twisted. Let us say, for instance, there is a beautiful movie called Upside Down. In fact, the picture that I have taken is from that particular movie. As you can see, this is set in a planet that has dual gravity. It is set in a planet that has dual gravity. Okay. So, now and again there is an element of romance here. So, you can as well call it a sci-fi romance. So, how a person who belongs to, you know, the downward, you know, the downward realm reaches the upward realm and falls in love with a girl there, and how it poses lot of challenges, even you know, gravitational challenges and challenges in terms of, you know, defying authority and all that, and how they overcome. So, it is a brilliant novel. So, again it makes use of cutting edge you know, advances in science and based on some kind of scientific possibility. It is not that that type of science exists now, but when it comes to settings, it makes use of our scientific knowledge, our advances in technology, and therefore weaves its plot around them. So, these are some works. So, well known works are Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and The Diary of Space Traveller and other Professor Shanku stories, especially by Satyajit Ray in the Indian context, and all of them, you know. And you have Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. So, these are some very well known novels. And when it comes to movies, you have Interstellar, of course, Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, you must have watched it, right? It is said that the entire movie was shot in the budget that exceeded India's budget for Chandrayaan. It is something like that. Okay. And you have Avatar, which won several international awards, Oscars too, probably more than 5 Oscars, something like 7 Oscars, Avatar. You can imagine when you have seen the movie, you can see how it is set in a different planet, and how it has its own creatures, how it has different types of people, and how there is a kind of an interaction between people of our world and people of their world, the consequence of that. Beautifully visually enriching masterpiece, all of them, you know. So, yeah, maybe in order to understand some of these concepts better, I also bring in examples from the movies, alright, because movie is also a type of fiction. It is a cellular fiction, you know. If novel is a verbal fiction, movie is a cellular fiction that makes use of audiovisual elements. Therefore, in order to better understand our categories, I bring in concepts from there. So, from science sci-fi, let us go ahead and discuss other kind of speculative fiction, in fact fantasy. Fantasy is probably one of the most favorite genres of literature for many of us because of very rich setting it presents. As opposite to sci-fi, in fact sci-fi and fantasy novel, they belong to speculative fiction, but as opposed to sci-fi science fiction which deals with universes or future times, here these stories focus on different kingdoms. Therefore, they may happen very much within our realm, but in a different dimension within our world, something like that, you know. So here it's a, as I said, it's a rich tapestry of characters, rich tapestry of sound, settings and all of them. So it's like a parallel cosmos, you create a parallel cosmos. Some of the well known examples are Harry Potter series. Now look what happens here. In fact, Harry Potter world is tucked very much within our world, right, because you can enter the world of Harry Potter through platform, some particular platform which exists in our own platform, you know. So therefore, you can say this world is tucked just behind our world, or you know, it's between the spaces, something like that. Other well known examples include The Lord of Rings and even C.S. Lewis, The Lion, The Witch and the Wardrobe. All of them, you know, are novels to begin with, and they've also been turned into extraordinary movies, visually enriching movies. Sometimes they also make use of historical settings, but of course here they do not resemble any historical personality, you know, just the setting is a bit historical, especially the Middle Ages. Okay, when you look at The Lion, The Witch and the Wardrobe, the setting is the Middle Ages and some kingdoms, but these kings may not resemble any kings that you and I know of in modern history. So these are some possible things that we can keep in mind. The moment we say fantasy, you have mythic creatures, otherworldly beings, magical thoughts, all of them, you know. So that's the reason why, let's say for instance, when you say unicorn, the moment you come across a unicorn, you should know that you are reading a work that belongs to fantasy. So these are some well-known types. Let's continue our discussion of types of fiction or genres of fiction in the next class. Until then, take care.